So Tracy and I are co-founders of the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy, which we founded about a year and a half ago. And so we had not met in person until this morning. And so we don't know what we're doing here, but we're setting up some key tools that we're going to use to try and keep on time. Tracy, mic check, please.
Mic check, please.
All right. And as you're going to see on the next slide, Tracy and I can't stand still, so we're not getting behind that podium box. And we've got this very fancy title here, The Guided and the Guide, an experiential lens on the transition to autopsychotherapy through coaching, which means something, I think, we will discover as we go through.
I hope so. Otherwise, what have we been doing?
Good question. But first, if you came to class, this is what you would see about us, but we're going to do something different. What we're doing today is we're going to talk about our personal relationship, which is I have been Tracy's coach for a while, and so we're going to tell you just a little bit about that for our introductions.
Yeah, so just a little thing. I'm going to try not to cry. So Kate as a guide, she is the guide, I am the guided in this whole situation. Kate as the guide is challenging and safe, always. She is loving and she holds your hand in the scary spaces and she stands up for me when I can't.
And Tracy, as the guided, is courageous and committed, and she shows up for herself over and over and over again. And she's going to be telling her personal story, and I'm going to be telling something that's much more theoretical, so I think she's the courageous one up here right now.
Yeah, and kudos to Eric and Rachel for telling your stories, because my knees are wobbly. So this is our agenda, clearly. We are going to start by talking about the guide part of the Theory of Positive Disintegration, Dabrowski's concept of it. We're specifically talking about the advisor guide. We will use those words interchangeably because we can't stick to one, apparently. I'm going to tell you a little bit about coaching, how we're defining it for ourselves and for you all in this room for this session. And then we will get to the good part, which is the story. So we're going to try to fly through this first part.
Flying, we are not so good at, but we're going to try. I'm going to start by touching briefly on the guide role as articulated in the Personality Shaping Through Positive Disintegration, particularly chapter 4, the advisor and his role. So you're going to have to imagine me in something else, I guess. I don't know. But the thing that is really interesting about the role of the guide as articulated by Dabrowski is the thing that over and over and over again he says is that the guide has to be well developed themselves, of a really high level of development. He then also comes back and says you can't expect them to be perfect and you can't expect them to be all the way at the top because that would be unreasonable and nobody would get help. So the first part is that the guide needs to be well developed. The second part is that they need to know an awful lot of stuff: psychology, education, therapy, the kind of philosophical things that show up when people go through these existential things, psychologically intuitive and open to customizing everything for the person in front of them. The other thing that is important to have as context for this is that the advisor or guide role starts with a very leading kind of place, come from a place of mentorship, a place of I've been here, done that, I've got some tools, and then backs off, subtly handing things over to the individual being guided to do their own work for themselves, and then eventually being on call in case they're needed later.
Okay, so the guide role from the coaching lens. This is the International Coaching Federation definition of coaching. We are both ICF accredited coaches. This is our lens on coaching. But I think the most important word up there is partnering. And really it's partnering for growth. That's the gist of this slide. It is partnering for growth. So it's actually not guiding, specifically not guiding, in fact, but we're messing with the words a little bit. So it's Also not very theoretically based, to be perfectly honest. It's like we grabbed some stuff from different places and created some best practices, and they've borne out pretty well over the last 30 years, so we're keeping them. But we're bringing the theoretical impact of TPD to the coaching sphere. So this is what a typical coaching engagement would look like. You envision the ideal result, you have a bunch of coaching sessions where you do some work, and then you are getting to your ideal result. Does that sound familiar, Dabrowskians, right? The only thing is, it looks very clean cut, except what if you can't envision the ideal results? We're gonna talk about that. And this is what we do in those individual little loops, coaching sessions. So this is a traditional coaching session. The client comes with a topic. There's some open discussion and a lot of questions from the coach to evoke more awareness. Then they co-create an experiment or an action plan, and the coachee goes off and does their thing. And then they come back the next week and see how it went. We sort of did this, except I hardly ever bring a topic, and I'm always like, sorry, I don't have a topic.
Yeah, and I'm always there in the background going, you got a topic. Your topic is your personal growth, and you've always got that topic every single session.
I've actually, it's been long enough that I'm just like, nope, what are we gonna talk about? But the key thing is, and this is true for our sessions as well as the ICF, the key thing is that there's no advice giving. And coaching seems to have come with this thing that you kind of come to a coach, we're gonna tell you what to do, we're gonna give you the tips and tricks and tell you all the advice. This is absolutely incorrect, and it was not ever at play that I remember in my coaching sessions. Okay.
All right, here we go, our stories. So thanks, Chris, for the Positive Disintegration Facebook group, because that's where it all began. I am in the process of trying to get my Master Certified Coach from the ICF, and that means I need a lot of coaching hours. And unlike Rachel, I've been slacking. So I came into the Positive Disintegration group and I said, hey, I'm looking for my credential. I will give away coaching.
And I said, yes, please. Raise my hand, yes, please, I will do that. That fit my budget at the time, reduced fee coaching. And I raised my hand very easily. This is also thank you, Chris, because I knew that Chris respected Kate so much. And that made it easy.
Your turn next.
And then I came in, so we were talking about what assumptions did we come in with? And as soon as, like, she was like, can you think of a picture or a metaphor? And I was like, no, because I don't think I really came in with much in the way of assumptions. I assumed I would be challenged. I assumed things me would be better. That's as specific as I could get, better. And I assumed that we'd be using the ICF coaching model, that I was gonna get the coaching that I expected and that I had bought into too.
All right, so the picture reference is that my picture is a picture of actually, it's the metaphor of my personality ideal as it stands at the moment, and I did not have it at the time, but I thought it was appropriate for today. My assumptions were that we would do coaching, that because Tracy was coming through the positive disintegration space, that she had overexcitabilities, had probably gone through at least one multi-level disintegration and found the theory interesting. I had a suspicion that she might be a little bit heady and a little not embodied. And I assumed that we would go on an adventure together.
And she was mostly right.
Yeah, and so I assumed that because I was assuming that she probably had done some multi-level disintegration at some point, I assumed we were going to be playing in this chart, and that we were going to be looking at, and I was going to be able to see things in the light of the multi-level dynamisms if I was looking for a framework to bring things to Tracy's attention.
And I brought an awareness of Dabrowski. You know, I'd done some of the reading. Honestly, some of the reading, but I knew the general gist, right? You don't hang out with Chris Wells and not know the general gist of the theory of positive disintegration. You just don't. And I had experience in development, so my degree's in human development. So I had a bunch of developmental models. I'd had some disintegrations. I'd had sort of the peak experience, you know, go back to your center of gravity, develop into where you were, stabilize at the new center. Occasionally, when, you know, stuff hits the fan, there's fall back into a lower stage, and that's okay too. But that was my understanding of development, and I don't think it's too far off from what happens, you know, along these ways.
Yeah, so just a warning, this is messy. In order to do this work, you have to go into the mess. You have to actually play in all the places. And one of the reasons that it is valuable to go with a guide is getting trapped in the mess sucks. Like being in the mess sucks, but getting trapped in the mess really sucks. Yeah, so this is the mess that we went into.
Well, and wait, by the way, we both knew it was going to be messy. That was one of our common assumptions.
Yeah, so we tried to tell our story and remember what happened. Neither of us took notes because actually what happens in a coaching session is that Tracy shows up. We do this on Zoom, and Tracy shows up in one window and I show up in one window, but we look at each other and we just talk with really deep presence, except when we get up and do other things. And the number of notes that get taken is not quite zero, but it's close. So this is reconstructed from memory.
And we all know about human memory, right?
Yeah, so this is all clear and we can go home now?
That's what I was thinking. Done.
All right. So one of the things that was always present for me with this is that whatever is top of mind for Tracy was something we could use. Everything is grist for the mill.
And I didn't know that. Like, I only just figured that out within the last few months, and we've been doing this since September of 2022. I would sometimes bring a very tactical, like typical coaching, concept, and I thought, oh my God, I'm wasting a coaching session with brilliant Kate, who's like, we're ready to do the deep work, we do the deep work, and I don't know how to get my reports done. And then we'd start talking, and within half an hour I'd be crying, and we'd be reaching deep truths, and I'm like, it was about the reports, wasn't it? Nope. It was also about all these other things.
Because I'm like Eric, I like it when they cry.
I like it when my clients cry too.
All right, so we're going to dive into that complicated picture for a little bit. This is our map. Here we go.
So this is where I came in. In coaching, you usually have a 20-minute, 30-minute discovery call, consultation call, whatever you want to call it, to sort of get to know each other, see if you fit, see if this is going to feel like a good thing. And one of the questions that we often ask to our clients is, so what changes do you want to see? Other coaches will ask, what goals do you want to get to? Goals is hard. And I came in and Kate asked me a question like that, and I said, I don't know. I want to develop. I have been stagnant, and it's time to go back to development. This isn't okay anymore.
Yeah, so this was a great starting point because in that conversation, I could hear disquietude with self, I could hear shame, I could hear the dissatisfaction with herself, I could hear the third factor, I could hear that she had enough self-awareness that the subject-object in herself was there. I could tell that we were right in the middle of this mucky middle. So we played. Do you want to?
Well, we have different memories of this next pit.
Do you want to set us up by telling us about the values that you came in with?
Right. So things I came in with were all the things that Kate listed. And also I had this list of values that I'd done in a workshop about a year before. And they were it was top 10 list. It was things like curiosity and reliability and self-discipline, which I no longer am sure exist actually. So I should probably get rid of that one. But that competence, those were the kinds of words that were on there.
Yeah, my skepticism, I hid from her, but it was deep that these were actually the values that she was going to end up with. So we started playing, we started having conversations, and we started dancing. You may not have noticed because you were listening to us that on the bottom of those introduction slides, Tracy and I both have dancer, and this is actually a really important part of how I work as a guide. I am trained in a body of work called Interplay, which uses improvisational dance, singing, storytelling, and stillness to unlock the wisdom of the body. And I brought it to this relationship.
More importantly, we have random acts of dance before presentations. So that's what we were doing a few minutes ago. So neither of us really know how we got to bird as a value, because bird, foreshadowing, bird's the value. I remember it being a visualization. I remember sitting and seeing it come and seeing sort of like the landscape develop and all of that. And my visual was kind of like a bald eagle So watching the eagle nests and watching the chicks hatch and everything got me through my dissertation. So it was that, and I became fascinated with them and with the sort of their expansiveness of their wings. And it's not just the flying, it's not like I want to fly like Superman, but the feeling of like a thermal wind as you just coast, right? Except that my bird looked like severe macaw. So it was red and blue and green and yellow, but sort of eagerly too.
Yeah, so I do a lot of work with metaphors as values as people are getting into working with shaking things up because when they're new, we can't access the words. The values are often this felt sense. They're often this sort of sense I want to have while I'm living, this sense of who I want to become that's felt, that has this lift, that has this energy, that has this sense of engagement. And so often, if we're coming from a really heady place and lists of values, you know, Brené Brown has the one that's like 100 and you like circle it and yeah. This is much more powerful in my work frequently when people are needing to shift into their inner authority.
Well, you remember it being a bodily exercise, don't you?
I remember that we were doing bodily exercises about the time that birds showed up.
Meanwhile, I'm going, bird's my value? Like, I don't, what? Okay.
Yeah, so we set up some between sessions things. I invited Tracy to bring bird into her life because this is the way that things happen. Once you've identified your values, you then have to figure out how to align your actions and live your life in alignment with the values, which is so much easier to say than do.
So I would often say in sessions, I should probably journal about that and then promptly not journal about anything. So that happened over and over. That is actually a picture of the journal that I did use on the few occasions I journaled. You'll like that's the coloring. I also built that Lego bird because why not, right? Like if we're gonna have a representation, it's also my screen wallpaper. So you know, like that's how I got bird into my life, is doing those things, and then the journaling started to take some form.
Yeah, at some point, there was, I think it was the TCC conference you were going to, I don't remember. Anyway, there was a conference that she was going to that she was very nervous about, and I suggested maybe you might actually journal this time, that might actually be useful, and
Really,
she did.
I did on the airplane. I put it in my bag, and I thought that's not going to happen, and then I did on the plane. So it was an invitation. That was not advice. Kate continually invites, and you can always decline an invitation, right? So she invited me to do this, and I was like, well, can't hurt, let's try this. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and got myself in the headspace I wanted to be in to show up the way I wanted to at this conference.
Next conference, she told me she was going to journal in advance of going to the conference. So this is the transition to autopsychotherapy. I invite, she tells me that she's found something that works for her, she picks it up.
And the journaling was around things like, what would Bird do? Right? How would Bird show up? What does Bird have to say about this? And that, like, Bird had lots of things to say and lots of contributions. It was very helpful.
Bird was a wonderful companion to our conversations for quite a long time, which is why we got very sad later.
I got annoyed. I didn't get sad. I got annoyed.
Okay, I got sad. She got annoyed.
Because we were working these metaphors and we'd be in a topic and Kate would say, well, what does Bird have to say about this? And Bird had started to have nothing to say. Bird would sit on his darn perch and like move a stick around in his nest and look at me. And I'm like, this is not helpful. Come on, do you want to fly? Are we standing here for a reason? And he's like a bird brain, like totally not helpful like we were used to.
Yeah, so as you do in these circumstances, you drop the tool. You say, okay, maybe Bird is not the place to go, and we play within a whole lot of other tools. I introduced some other dance forms. We did a bunch of other visualizations. We had other just plain conversations. And
as we did more and more of this, right, I'm getting more comfortable with it. I'm getting more comfortable with using the somatics to get to something and not being in my head and like, so are we at the part where I tell the story about the thing? Okay.
the off-screen one?
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Okay. So there was like this really sort of, the one that exemplifies it for me is there was one day that I was trying to answer one of Kate's questions, and she noticed that it was nonverbal. Like I didn't have the concept enough to put words around it so that I could communicate it to her. And so what we did was Kate put on some music, and she has great music taste, so it's always just the right music somehow.
I select it randomly every single time. It's perfect. The universe is awesome as the DJ.
And I kind of went off camera, and she said, I just want you to move. I don't want you to think. I just want you to move, and let's see what happens. And so I did. And I started moving and, flowing and, I don't know, jerking. And after a little while, I was like, oh, okay, got it. And came back and sat down to my chair, and I was like, okay, here's what it is. And like we had gotten to the point where I could do that with the support.
Yeah. One of the things I love about that particular activity is as I started with, you don't have to be able to articulate it. You get to know it and you get to have it, whether you have the words for it or not. And then when we started to move into the music, she danced off screen because I don't need to be able to see it because it's not for me at all. It's entirely for her. And if she'd gotten nothing out of it, we would have tried something new. But she got something new out of it. So in this time, and this is a place that we actually don't remember the chronology really at all. Truth. We noticed a couple of themes coming up. Play.
No, Kate noticed a couple of themes coming up.
True. Yes, this is true. So because when we're doing all this work, she's in herself. She's checking in with her somatic experience. She's observing her cognition. She's doing all of that, and she's very, very internally focused. And I'm keeping an eye out on her blind spots, on the things that she can't see because they're physiological that I can see from the outside, all of that sort of thing. So I'm also listening to the words that show up over and over again because I'm listening for hints of emerging values. And I noticed two things. One is that every few months, play would come up as a thing that was a little bit of a yearning, but not really easy for her to talk about or figure out how to take into post-session stuff.
And at that point, I actually thought, I know play is good for me. I need to play. That was as far as I got.
We were back in, I
So the
should
playing
journal.
obviously wasn't going that way.
I should journal, I should play. So play was coming up. And the other thing that was happening was that people kept telling Tracy that she was good at loving other people. And she couldn't recognize it in herself.
And I still have trouble receiving it, just
Yeah.
like this reflection. Yeah, because I think of myself kind of like Kate described me at the beginning, right? Like I've always been rewarded for my brain. That's how I know myself, as a brain on a stick. And also I'm a dancer, but that's separate from my brain somehow, right? Like there's still a mind-body divide at that point. And so like, and my sister's the sensitive one. Everybody knows that. Tracy's the smart one, Kristen's the sensitive one. And, oops, I just did names. There you go, Eric. And so like, I was not totally comfortable with this, and I would just like, when I get a reflection, sometimes from Kate, sometimes from other people, maybe in not so many words, I didn't know what to do. Like I couldn't receive it. It would sit like there, plunk. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't recognize that. But Kate saw something different.
Yeah, and so those kept coming up, and we weren't actually making any progress on them, really. Like it was, I think the love thing was starting to like be not the weirdest concept on the planet, maybe the second weirdest concept on the planet.
Also, when she would say it to me, I would cry, and one of the indicators that we've hit a truth in my coaching sessions is I start crying even though I'm denying the thing. So there we are.
This is when you started noticing that your coaching was getting better.
Yes.
So she was in fact loving her clients better.
Well, that's what Kate said. I thought I was improving my skills by teaching people in our academy, because that's what we were doing, just skills.
I'm letting her in on the secret that we're teaching people how to love better. We just call it coaching, but she's getting there.
Okay.
And so Tracy is very, studies all the things. So she went and she studied a thing.
So I have been wanting, actually, for about a year and a half, this is this past spring, I've been wanting to do these values-based
Integration.
It's VBIP, The P is process. We don't remember the I ever. This is Heather Morgan's values process that she describes in Unmasking Autism, or Devin Price describes of her doing it in Unmasking Autism. And I actually tried to sign up the year before to do it, to learn what it was and how to do it. And I couldn't make it to the one class she had that year. So this spring, I had signed up back in January before we'd made this level of progress, but I took the class in April. And the way that the process works, it's a whole multi-day thing, but the first part of it is you tell your stories to a coach and they take copious notes, and then they observe and notice what are the words and what the phrases and the concepts that keep coming up and up and up. And then you sort of group them, and then you theme them, and you do the thing, right, and define them. And I was totally perplexed because these are the ones that came up. There was nothing responsible about them. It was awe and love and self-assuredness, which took me a while to find that word. Possibility, curiosity, those kind of aligned with me before, but fun? I'm not the fun sister. Like, she's the fun sister. I'm not the fun sister, so I don't know what that was about. But like, there they were. They were literally in black and white, and even I could see like the frequency of them. I was like, well, okay. I guess I'll go tell Kate about this, because that's what I do.
Yeah. And so I made circles and arrows, but actually no arrows, but I have to say circles and arrows because I have to say circles and arrows. I made circles and lines because what I see in this list is I see higher order dynamisms. I see aiming towards the personality ideal. I see autonomy. I see this new set of values from a higher place emerging here. So I go, cool, because I'm like that. Okay, Tracy is going to remember maybe what this picture is.
So again, I got on a plane. This was in May. And I had been invited to this like mini retreat thing that was just put together by a few women, one of whom I knew this much. The other two I had no concept of who they were in the world. They were just all ADHD coaches or therapists. And so I'm a bundle of nerves. And I took my journal. Kate did not invite. I took my journal and I wrote in my journal. And unlike the several other times I had done this, when I looked back, as we prepared this, I didn't do Word, and I wrote 2 pages, and I was fine. And I went in and I showed up the way I wanted to, and I showed up the way I wanted to all weekend. And it was excellent. It was just excellent. So Kate pointed out, oh, you did that on your own. Look at that.
Yeah. This is the trajectory I love to see in my clients. Typically, when I have clients who are less deeply committed to growth than Tracy is, I can tell that they're getting to the edge of where they're willing to go about 2 sessions before they get there. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to start doing some marketing. And then they come in and they tell me, I think I'm good for now. And I say, I think you are. I'm here if you ever need me. And I would say a substantial portion of them come back like 2, 3, 5 years later when they get stuck again, but mostly they're good to go. So this is always a really exciting time for me. But the thing that really strikes me is that what I see in Tracy right now is very much in line with my sense of what my personality ideal is, and I'm starting to develop some theories, because that's what I do, about the possible universality of this. And then this is really that she's starting to tap into becoming a manifestation of love in action, really taking this out and becoming a force of love in the world. I'm seeing it in the work that we're doing at the Academy, growing deeper and deeper all the time. This is the journey that we've been on. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense.
So this is, and recognize this is a slice, right? We had 2 total journeys. This is the slice from the last not quite 2 years that we're doing, but specifically for this reason, so we could put in this framework.
Yep. So where we are now is we're keeping going on the upward journey.
Well, where we are now, Kate asked me this question.
Yeah.
Once we had finished, like we had made a whole map, like all of those little figures and squiggles and whatever, they're literally from a mind map that we had made. She just cut and pasted them. She said, so where are we now? And I thought, and I was like, I don't know. I don't know where we are. I'm in it. I am still subject. So now is not yet object. I know some of where we are now is pretty vulnerable and not for public consumption yet. But I don't have, like, I don't know what it means yet. I don't know how it sits yet. I'm still in it. So I don't know where we are. I'll tell you later where we were on the map. And she went, of course.
Yeah, so that's where we are, and that's how we got here.
Oh my God, we did that in 30 minutes. The whole thing.
Wow.
We took 30 minutes to do just that complicated slide when we rehearsed it.
Yeah, so we've got time for lots of questions.
Please ask questions so we don't just stand up here for a while.
Okay. We have to walk with the mic.
Yeah, we'll put one in there. Thanks, y'all. Thank you.
Hey, what would you say the difference is between this type of coaching that you're describing and psychotherapy?
Oh, we've never gotten that question before, right?
So this is a really contentious question in the world right now, because the gap between therapy and coaching in this developmental space is essentially non-existent at this point. The places where therapy and coaching are more distinct are not in this higher level developmental space. I will say that there are very, very few coaches that I have met who are able to go anywhere into the depths of people who are really stuck in disintegration, and that anytime I hear them talking about not referring out, I get really freaking scared because at a certain point, what you're able to support from this Dabrowski lens in that mucky mess is an exact replication of how much of your own work you've already done plus some. And so the real masterful coaches and the real masterful therapists, if they're taking this non-pathological approach, are doing very much the same thing. What the coaches cannot do is diagnose. They can't get any of the labels things. And one of the things that Tracy and I are very, very committed to in our teaching is teaching the coaches to recognize when their clients hit that edge of their window of tolerance and to refer at that moment, because that's where the training isn't. And so it's that edge. It's the crisis edge where no coaches are qualified. And it has taken me a very long time to realize that this level of depth from the pure coaching space, well, Tracy always says that she can't stop being my client just because we're working together, because otherwise she could never find a coach. So there's a depth that I know I've done my work to be able to do this in a way that I'm not sure I know another coach in this space who can. It's not using the ICF model of coaching for sure.
So, a few additions. I'm doing Kate -1 work often with my clients. So I wouldn't be able to handle a me, but I can handle smaller disintegrations or beginnings and sort of help with that. When we talked about a typical coaching scenario, so the coaches who are comfortable with the topic, like you bring a topic, no, you have to bring a topic. They're dealing with unilevel unilevel disintegration at best. And that's great. That's what that's what they're comfortable doing. That's where they need to be. And one of the things that we've also talked about is there's harm done, right? By well-meaning therapists and by well-meaning coaches who are not equipped to do this work. That's a thing. And also, sometimes you know from that first conversation, it's not a fit. This is why I didn't have a coach or a therapist for several years, because I couldn't find anybody who got it, who thought beyond where I was thinking, right? So a lot of times the clients will self-select out. If clients come to me and they just want to work on like the behavioral parts of ADHD, right? Like I can do that. Honestly, I'll be bored, but they don't pick me. And that's cool, because that's not what I bring. And there are other people who can bring that. Yeah?
Yeah, I would say when I'm looking at whether I can take on a client, they have to have a reasonably well-developed third factor and I can see it in the first session, subject-object in themselves before I am willing to take on someone who's that stuck. I quite often take on clients who are like, I need to just figure out how to get along with my boss, and I know that we're going to end up doing developmental work, and they don't have that subject object in themselves, and I know that we're going to be doing a whole lot of clean language, communication skills, and that sort of thing, and we're not going to be doing this work.
And that's okay because the client sets the agenda. In coaching, the client sets the agenda, the client decides where we're going. So there's that. One of my favorite things Kate says is coaching is not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. That was an over answer to your question. You've got two of us, so we're just gonna like keep running on and we build on each other. What else we got?
We have a couple more questions in Slido. If you have a question, add them to slido.com. From Carrie, when you are in the murkiness, how do you stay in the funk to work through the thing? How do you stay present with the feelings and not dismiss the murkiness?
So one of the stories we didn't tell was the first Christmas after we started working together, I had a major existential crisis, like existential loneliness was it. And I was very like borderline non-functional between Christmas and after New Year's. And there's a few things about that. One was, I kept saying, I just got to talk to Kate. I just got to make it to Kate. We can figure this out together. So having that person is one way that you can stay in it. But that was also, because we had already done some work, that was the first time that I wasn't scared I was in a depressive episode, that I wasn't scared that I was going to stay there forever. I saw this and I was like, okay, this sucks bad. And this is going to help. This is like the other side of this is going to be like develop, it's going to be growth, it's going to be something, I don't know how, I don't know why, I don't know what it will look like, but I welcome this to an extent so that we can get to the growth part. So some of it is having that enough object, I think, on the thing to be able to say that, and some of it is like knowing you have a person who's there.
So I would say a couple of things. One is, so the particular example that Tracy gives is one that I have very deep and longstanding personal experience, and I have worked through my shit. And so I can go to that space with her because I can be the been there, done that, and I'm okay with this. And I know that I'm not going to get stuck there anymore. So that's one thing. One of the things that is why I need my clients to be at a certain level of development is I need to actually be able to trust that if I'm not holding a safe container for them, they won't bring me the problem. And actually people are quite good at that until they're in a certain level of crisis when it sort of spills. And so I need to make sure that I'm not taking on the when it's spilling, so that Tracy was enough in her awareness, even in the middle of the muck, that I was like, okay, she feels safe bringing it to me, so I'm okay that we can be here. And I trusted my own ability, and we sat there, and I never got dysregulated. I just sat with her and talked and that sort of thing. And so when you stay in the muck, that's what it takes. Quite often what happens is that if if the coach isn't developed enough, if the guide isn't developed enough, the guide just doesn't bring the stuff. I mean, I spent my early coaching career working with people who had only ever seen therapists who hadn't done their work, who came to me and were able to do coaching with me because I had done that deeper existential work. And so it was fascinating to watch how they had self-protected in terms of who they would actually open up with. So there's a little bit of, people can get to the point where they can't control it, but most of the people that I run into actually won't bring the stuff if they can't stay with it.
So it's also important to note when I was in that level of muck, I also went auditioning therapists. That's how I thought of it, was auditioning them. I did audition 3 at once, and then I narrowed it down. And I found one who knew enough to know she didn't know what I was talking about, but she could hold the space. That was the best I got. So there are people out there, but like, go searching. Contact one of us. We will put you in touch with people. The other thing that I forgot to say when we had the crazy diagram up. This is the part, like, I never heard of the guide and the advisor. I didn't notice that part of Dabrowski until Kate brought it up. I haven't seen it talked about, right? And that big gap between spontaneous multi-level disintegration and the start of like organized disintegration, there's this big empty gap on this otherwise totally full diagram from Dabrowski. And I was like, it's kind of like that cartoon where the scientists go, and then a miracle happens. And they're like, I think you need to refine this part a little bit. Like, that's how it always felt. And so how do you get from spontaneous multi-level disintegration in the muck to autopsychotherapy? And this is one of the ways that it can be done. In coaching, we say, yeah, you could probably get where you want to go. We'll probably help you get there faster. And I think that's true here too.
Yeah, in the section on the guide where Dabrowski's talking about the qualifications of the guide, there are about 5 academic disciplines that he lists that are not the same as each other. And in this world of specialization, most people sort of get 1 or 2. And I'm the weird person who did all of them in undergraduate and never let them go. And it's kind of been my special interest. Yeah, there's a little weirdness there in me too. Yep.
Okay, we got some more. From Emma, given the Kate -1 thing, how important is it to coach other coaches, train the trainer?
So coaches that don't have coaches aren't growing as coaches, and their client base is going to stagnate, and there's a level at which they will not get better.
Which is pretty depressing when you know you can't find a coach who can, get it and coach you, right? Like that still was true. But obviously we feel very strongly about coaching the coaches. Not only should coaches have coaches, but we started the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. And what we do there is help people not learn to do this level of work, right? But help them to be a lot of things Rachel talked about: present, constantly asking permission, watching for the signs, the physiological signs that someone's getting dysregulated, those kinds of things, and learning to watch for them in everybody, not just neurodivergent people, even though that's her, right? We're neurodiversity inclusive, which means do it for everybody and you'll get these people covered. So we feel very strongly that, yeah, we need to train the trainers. And honestly, the ICF is not doing great in this area for this topic. So we did it.
Yeah, the thing that Rachel said about identification and diagnosis often creating a disintegration, one of the things that's happening in coaching a lot is that there's ADHD coaching or sort of diagnosis-specific coaching, which tends to be tactical strategies for managing and coping with the challenges and for advocating in the workplace and that sort of thing. And coaches who are trained in that specific sort of approach, even if they've got ICF coaching, are finding that they're being overwhelmed by the existential questions. And particularly in the UK, where therapy is a whole lot less accessible, people are coming to coaches when they need someone who's able to do more of this stuff. And so a huge part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that they're not doing harm when their clients come to them and won't or can't access a therapist.
And one of my other gigs, because I have a few, like most of us contractor freelance types do, right? One of my other gigs is I am a trainer and mentor at the International ADHD Coach Training Center. And I have been for the last 3.5 years, which is great. And these are people who come in with no coaching experience. They learn to be coaches through an ADHD lens. And they have formulas they follow. They have structures. New coaches, ask these questions to start to make sure you understand what the client's getting. Ask these questions at the end to make sure the client is integrating, right? That's how you got to start. So there's also something here about coaching maturity. And it's not necessarily the number of hours you have, it's your development and how much coaching have you done and where, how much are you reaching for growth and all those kinds of things. But what we noticed about halfway through the year of doing these master classes every month was we're expecting very mature coaching. We're pulling them up probably more quickly than they would find it on their own. And that's okay, because they're coming. But yeah.
And we're doing it because their clients need it from them, and it's the only way that we can help serve their clients.
And the coaches want it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have full classes, right? So.
Okay, we have another question. You could take one of those mics out of the
Oh, could we?
thing. I mean, put it back later. So from Anonymous, how much do you discuss Dabrowski's work while in sessions? How meta is it from both of your point of views?
In the last year and a half, not at all, probably.
A little bit, but back to the assumptions, we both came in with that framework. So it's sort of unconscious competence coming into it. With my coaching clients, every once in a great while, somebody is like, I can see them disintegrating, and I might ask, could I offer something? Get permission. Tell them very quickly, what do you think about that? What's that spark for you, right? So constantly putting it back in their lap. But if it's something that sparks for them, like maybe that's something that could be helpful, because you don't want to just also leave somebody in a spontaneous multi-level disintegration if you can be there with them. So what was the question?
How often do we actually reference the framework
Yeah.
in session?
Us, not that much.
Yeah, I think I probably threw a couple of dynamisms words in the first few months as we were building trust.
But as we created this, we also talked about, both of us have so many developmental models in our brains, and that's not present when we're coaching. It is influencing every question, right? It is coming through in the questions, but it is not. So at this level of development, here's what you can expect, no.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think it's important to think about in terms of this telling the story is I've been coming to this intuitive sense of how
That's 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's our allotted time for the slides before we take questions. So we can take questions now. I've been coming to this understanding of how what I do in the coaching session and what I see in my clients over time, and how it maps to this map. I don't know, since just before I came on the podcast for the first time. That was sort of the first time I started trying to articulate what it was that I was seeing. And so there's a level of rigor to the mapping here that was absolutely retroactive when we were like, okay, we're 2 weeks away from doing this and we need to turn in our slides and we need to make a slide. And this story doesn't have any linear narrative yet.
I mean, it barely did when we were finished, so what we tried.
From Anonymous, I'm curious about how you worked through any ethical issues in presenting today as a coach-client dyad, given the deep and therapeutic nature of the relationship.
Oh, well, that was actually easier than most case studies, because like we kind of came up with it together, but I was like, well, what if I'm a case study? So obviously I had given him permission and said, like, let's do this thing. That's the ethical thing. We talked about where the boundaries were. We're not sharing this part. This part we can share. We have enough of a story with this, we don't need that part, right? So we worked that through together, but we didn't have a direct conversation about ethics, because usually it's to protect the client, right? The ethical issues are to protect the client, and I'm right here. So I'm good, mostly.
Yeah, and we had several conversations about whether we wanted to tell a particular story or whether we didn't want to tell a particular story. There's some stuff we very explicitly were like, yeah, that's not for public consumption. And so you haven't heard it. Maybe 10 years from now, she'll be willing to say.
2 drinks in.
Okay, the next question. This is from Aineke, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. As the guided, how can you stay confident that you stay on your path when this kind of coaching leads you to so many layers that you didn't know about?
I trust my coach. I don't know where I'm going, what path. It's all a murk, right? It's thick fog in front of me. That's why I can't tell you where I am now. But I trust my coach. And if you can't trust your coach at that level, then you need to find a different person, because they will hold that for you when you can't.
I know there's a where there, but I have no idea where there is.
Yeah, a question
But I know there's a there.
A question we often ask each other in the middle of a session is, so where are we? And then we figure it out, and then we keep going.
Okay, that's the only ones we have on Slido. Do we have any more questions from anyone in the room?
Everybody knows dinner is coming, right?
Oh, yes.
I hear very, sorry. I hear very often, I trust my coach, but shouldn't it be my coach helps me trust myself?
That too. But when
Because- sorry,
when I can't yet, I trust that she knows when I don't. And then I get to know later. But that's a lot of trust that I put in a person, and there's very few people that get to have that.
But would it be worth it? Because when your growth model is positive disintegration, then it won't be the first time that you're disintegrating. So wouldn't it be worth it to go back and look at the process that you already have been to? Because it gives you a lot of confidence that you survived it, because sometimes you feel like you're not going to survive it this time. So would that make sense to do as a coach?
I think I hear what you're saying. I'll let Kate answer the coach side of that. From my side of it, because I have been here before and I do know the things, and it's iterative, right? The piece I said about like this time I was in the deep murk, but I knew I wasn't going to stay there. I knew this was developmental. I knew I could make this work for me. That was that, right? So it's already it's in my body. Yeah? But what do you notice?
Yeah, and if somebody doesn't have that in their body, but we know it's happened in the past, one of the things that I might do as a coach is say, we've talked about how you've had this sort of experience before. Does that offer you any comfort here? But I would always bring it to the present, and I would always bring it just as sort of a like, we've had this conversation, is it relevant here? Is it useful? If it's not useful, it's not useful. The other thing that I want to just touch on is the role of the coach in getting the client to trust the coach. Part of what makes me trustworthy is that I believe that I can't make her trust me. That I know that trust is a gift that I have honored to have bestowed upon me, and that with that kind of sacred gift of her trust, I have got to do my damnedest to be trustworthy and honor that gift.
And I am trusting myself more and more, right? Every time we do this, like now versus September 2022, very different, very different. And will continue to be different, I hope. But I probably will because I have a really good coach.
Okay, any more questions?
Thank you for listening to our story.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate and Tracy.